Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the sunny side. So in today's video, we're gonna be reacting to and talking about why the Into the Spider-Verse movie is never, ever gonna come out. And honestly, part of the reason, or maybe the main reason, is how corny Shameik Moore is. Shameik Moore has made this movie lose all of its aura. This guy is the corniest, cringiest, weirdest, most awkward individual I've ever seen in my life. Just seeing the way that he interacts with Haley Steinfeld when they're on press, when they're on the red carpet is so weird. He legit gives off like nice guy energy. He gives off like where's my hug at energy. The original movie came out in 2018 and now there's a massive cliffhanger that was at the end of the second film, and it's been years. It's been years since that came out, and the cliffhanger is still hanging. We're still holding on to it. Miles Morales is still stuck in this other world and hasn't gone home yet from where we're sitting. It's outlandish. But yeah, I'm really passionate about this because this movie is amazing. And without further ado, let's get into this.
March 29th, 2024. The date Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse was supposed to be released.
Yeah, it was.
It's been nearly a full year since then.
Full year.
And not only has the movie not been released, Sony hasn't even announced a release year. To me, this all seemed incredibly weird. And
They haven't announced the released year? I thought it was coming out 2027. Oh my.
the more I dug, the more bizarre
Oh
it got.
my gosh.
The movie's been plagued by delays, drama, and a production nightmare that Sony doesn't want you to know about. But the truth? It's even worse than you think.
Hi,
I've
how
gone
are
and dug
you?
up all the information so we can talk about how we got here and what this all means for not only Sony and the franchise, but the rest of the industry too. Let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Into the Spider-Verse.
Yup.
This was Sony's
I got
big
chills.
gamble, a film they hoped would redefine their animation studio's reputation after years of atrocious movies. No one could have predicted just how massive a success it would be though. Well, almost no one.
This movie literally made Puss in Boots a killer movie. Have you seen Last Wish? Puss in Boots. If you haven't seen Puss in Boots Last Wish, I urge you to go watch it. The animation style borrows a lot from Into the Spider-Verse, and just because of that, it makes me love Into the Spider-Verse so much more because I love Last Wish so much. So for them to have such a cliffhanger and to have no plan in the future to actually get to a conclusion or to make anything, it's just so annoying and stressful because it's so beautiful. It's so good. The animation style literally inspired so many things to change, and now we're just sitting here. We're just sitting here.
Even during production, there were signs that Into the Spider-Verse was something special. Its bold, hand-drawn comic book aesthetic, seamlessly blended with CGI, was already being described as revolutionary. But behind the scenes, things weren't nearly as smooth. See, Phil Lord and Rodney Rothman, the writers behind Miles Morales' cinematic debut, clearly wrote an incredible story. But less than a year before release, they decided to change the story and overhaul the entire third act, completely rewriting and restructuring the movie's climax. That's an honestly insane decision that threw the entire production into chaos, forcing animators and artists to completely scramble under extreme pressure.
That is
Still,
crazy.
Into the Spider-Verse not only became one of Sony's highest grossing films, it won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature.
It should.
So no harm done, right? Well, not quite. That last-minute, high-pressure creative process, yeah, it set a precedent that would have major consequences down the line. Now, here's where things get interesting. Even before Into the Spider-Verse hit theaters, Sony was so confident in its potential that they had already started early work on a sequel. The film's insane success in 2018 only cemented that decision, and by November...
That's what pisses me off, is that this movie did so well that they built in a sequel into the actual last portion of the second movie. If they just made it so the second movie was just a full film on its own, it wasn't ended on a cliffhanger, it would make the second film even better. But the fact that they made it seem like the next film was gonna come soon after the second one, it it made it so that we wanted the second one even, I mean, the third one even harder. We wanted it even more. So the fact that it's taken even longer for it to come out, we wouldn't have cared if it was just a full film, like how the first one was a full film. They just put their fucking marbles into one sack, and now the sack has holes in it. And you're trying to grab the marbles. I don't know if this makes any sense, but you know what I mean. I hate you, Shamik Moore.
2019, Across the Spider-Verse was officially announced. The studio wasted no time hyping it up, but then silence. Months passed, then an entire year. By 2020, updates on the sequel were scarce, aside from one major change. Sony pushed the release date from April 2022 to October 2022. It wasn't until early 2021, a whole year and a half after the sequel was announced, that producer Chris Miller revealed they were still working on the script. That might not seem unusual, after all, some scripts take years to refine, but for a movie that was already announced and dated, that was a pretty big red flag. As expected, the October 2022 deadline became impossible to meet, and in December 2021, Sony delayed the movie again, this time by an entire goddamn year, pushing it all the way to June 2023. But that wasn't the only surprise we got. They also announced that Across the Spider-Verse would now be the first of a two-part story, with Beyond the Spider-Verse being developed alongside it. Keep that in mind as you watch the rest of this video. Originally,
I will keep that in mind, good sir, because why are they making another film when they're already struggling to put out the second film? Why would you guys commit to a third film? What is Sony doing?
Across the Spider-Verse was supposed to be roughly the same size
Miguel!
as its predecessor, but that's not what happened. Instead, it ballooned into an enormous production with the largest crew of any animated film ever at the time. Nearly 1,000 artists. That's honestly nuts. But as we'll soon see, ambition without structure comes at a pretty steep cost. Despite having such a
Wait, conspiracy theory. What if the next film is taking so long to come out because AI came out between the second film and the third film, so therefore instead of using 1,000 artists, they're using a bunch of AI? Am I cooking? Am I cooking or am I burning? I don't know. I'm doing something.
Massive
Something's happening.
Production on Across the Spider-Verse was anything but smooth. Reports started to surface that over 100 artists had left the project due to extreme overwork, caused in large part by Phil Lord's management style.
His name's Phil Lord?
When 10% of your team quits, there's clearly something wrong. Animators were being asked to make last-minute changes to fully rendered sequences, something that is usually unheard of in the animation industry at that stage of production. Normally, major rewrites and changes happen early, during the storyboarding process, but on Across the Spider-Verse, sequences were being torn apart and redone long after they should have been locked. Animators described the working conditions as absolutely brutal, with some reporting 11-hour workdays, 7 days a week for over a year to compensate for the lost time. The core issue stemmed from Phil Lord being ridiculously indecisive creatively and having utmost control. He would even have final say against the directors. If Phil has a note that contradicts their notes, his note takes precedence. While his creative oversight obviously played a key role in shaping Across the Spider-Verse into an incredible movie, it also led to an exhausting and chaotic production process. Any singular change in the story often involved animation, final layout, cloth and hair effects, which have to repeatedly be redone anytime there's an animation change, the department that passes over the characters with ink lines and does all this crazy stuff like explosions, lighting and compositing, editing. These are a lot of artists affected by one change. Imagine an endless stream of them. It's not a surprise that morale was incredibly low during production, with a lot of people.
Was the Miles morale low? Like and subscribe.
Reassessing if this was even something they wanted to be a part of. On top of the demanding hours, many workers faced financial and job insecurity. Sony Pictures Imageworks, the studio handling the animation, is not a union studio, meaning artists had very little bargaining power and low pay. With the animators being underpaid, it forced many of them to rely on overtime pay just to make ends meet. Living in an expensive city like Vancouver made matters worse, with some struggling to cover costs despite working excessive hours. For international artists, the situation was even scarier. Many were working off visas and saw SPI as their best chance to stay in Canada, making it difficult to push back against the grueling conditions or leave the project. They were forced to endure long hours, low pay, and constant pressure just to maintain job security. A Vulture report also detailed how some animators left because they physically couldn't sustain the workload, while others pushed through months of intense crunch just to meet shifting creative demands. One artist described the experience as death by 1,000 paper cuts, with changes constantly undoing progress. Another stated that despite loving the final film, they would never work on a project with Phil Lord again. Across the Spider-Verse may have been a stunning achievement, but behind the scenes, it came at a steep human cost. That being said, Across the Spider-Verse finally hit theaters in June of 2023, 5 years after the first movie. It was a massive success, earning over $690 million at the box office. But behind the scenes, the production nightmare had left its mark. Many animators had walked away, unwilling to endure another grueling process for the sequel. And then there was Beyond the Spider-Verse, a film that was supposedly being worked on simultaneously. Except it wasn't. Not only was Beyond the Spider-Verse nowhere near completion when Across the Spider-Verse released, but the Vulture report suggests that production hadn't even started. It's no surprise.
Y'all did not even start the next film, but you have the previous film end on a cliffhanger? I'm baffed. I might go watch the first two films just to feel better.
That we've recently heard actors say voice work hasn't even begun in 2025. That's a huge red flag. In animation, voice recording usually happens before or during early animation, as it helps animators match character movements and emotions to the performances.
Yeah.
The fact that they haven't started means one thing. The movie isn't just delayed, it's nowhere close to being finished. To make matters worse, Sony initially blamed the delays on the Hollywood strikes of 2023. While it's true that the SAG-AFTRA strike halted a lot of productions, nearly every Sony movie that was delayed due to the strikes has since been released or has a confirmed release date. Beyond the Spider-Verse is the only exception. Not only does it not have a release date, it doesn't even have a confirmed release year. That makes absolutely no sense unless there are far bigger issues happening behind the scenes. And then there's the script. Rumors have circulated that Beyond the Spider-Verse's script was completely rewritten after Across the Spider-Verse released, though both composer Daniel Pemberton and producer Chris Miller have denied this. But even if it wasn't fully rewritten, we know that Into the Spider-Verse went through massive rewrites just a year before release, so it really wouldn't be surprising or far-fetched if Beyond the Spider-Verse is facing similar last-minute overhauls. This is clearly how Phil Lord works. In early 2024, we got another bizarre update. Composer David hinted at a 2025 release, teasing that one of his songs would be in the movie. But then Karen Sony said in August 2024 that voice recording was starting in a few months. Fast forward to December and January, and like I said, we know recording hasn't even begun. How is it possible that months later they're still in the same place? And that someone that's part of the movie thought it would be released in 2025, even though Sony has confirmed that's not going to happen. This could all potentially mean animation hasn't even started yet, and if we compare this to past Spider-Verse films, Beyond the Spider-Verse is years away from completion. I mean, honestly, with the lack of updates and the fact that voice recording is only just starting, I really cannot see this movie being released before 2027 or 2028. So what is actually going on here? The dark truth is that Phil Lord's control over these movies, while instrumental to their success, has also created a grueling
George
environment
Lucas
that pushes animators to their absolute breaking point. Artists are tired of being overworked, and Lord's frequent changes and revisions is likely the real reason Beyond the Spider-Verse is taking so goddamn long. Especially with how imperative it is to get this last movie absolutely perfect. Also, with the underpaid, overworked nature of this project, it's likely that a lot of people were turned off from working on it, which doesn't help in speeding up production. The fact that Sony is keeping everything so secretive only raises more questions. There hasn't been a single teaser, a single frame of footage, nothing. Compare that to Across the Spider-Verse, which had a teaser released a full year and a half before it hit theaters. This lack of transparency makes me feel like Sony themselves don't even know when the movie might be ready. The situation only gets more worrying when you look at how this might impact the rest of the industry. The Spider-Verse movies have been hailed as some of the most innovative animation films ever made, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in Western animation. But this level of artistry comes at a massive cost, one that's increasingly difficult to justify in an industry where animators are burning out faster than ever. These are the brutal realities of animation production, especially at major studios like Sony, where extreme overwork is usually treated as the norm. Sony's inability to provide a structured production pipeline combined with Lord's insane creative approach has created a work environment that is not even remotely sustainable. If this pattern continues, it raises serious questions about the future of animation as a whole. Will studios keep pushing for bigger, more ambitious projects at the expense of their workers, or will we finally see a shift in the industry where proper planning and
Look. Puss in Boots Last Wish mentioned. This movie is so good. If you haven't seen it, go watch it.
fair labor practices take precedence over last-minute perfectionism?
STEM Light Trap attracts and traps flying insects without chemical insecticides. STEM Light Trap.
Labor practices take precedence over last-minute perfectionism. Does it even make sense to try to replicate this incredible animation style if it might take a studio 6, 7, 8, 9 years to produce it if they're not overworking animators? It starts to become hard to envision.
Can you imagine if the frames per second of this movie was any faster? You can see that they move kind of choppily, like they kind of move like kind of teleporting a bit. Can you imagine if it was smooth, how much longer it would fucking take? Oh my god.
Produce it if they're not overworking animators. It starts to become hard to envision investing so much into these types of projects while keeping working conditions healthy. The animation industry is at a crossroads, and the outcome of Beyond the Spider-Verse's production could set a precedent for years to come. And what about the Spider-Verse franchise itself? The longer this delay drags on, the more momentum the series risks losing. Thankfully, us Spider-Verse fans are extremely patient, and I think I could speak for many of us when I say I'd rather a polished, perfected product in 10 years than something rushed in 5. But who knows? The excitement that Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse generated could slowly fade away, leaving Beyond the Spider-Verse as an afterthought. The truth is, Sony finds itself in an impossible situation. Either they rush Beyond the Spider-Verse to meet expectations and risk another grueling, overworked production, or they take their time, but at the cost of the audience losing interest. I'm personally hoping that all of these delays and lack of updates simply means the studio is giving the team all the time it needs to get this right, with zero pressure from external deadlines. If that's the case, and this movie turns out perfect, then this could be an incredible example for other animation studios to point to in terms of how to run production. That being said, it is clear that Beyond the Spider-Verse is in a state of complete uncertainty. Whether it's due to rewrites, animators pushing back against unfair conditions, or just complete mismanagement, one thing is clear. We are a long way from seeing Miles Morales return to the big screen. And unless Sony changes the way it approaches these productions, this might not be the last time we see an animated Sony movie stuck in limbo. The Spider-Verse films were meant to revolutionize animation, but if they're not careful, they might just become a cautionary tale.
Final thoughts. He brings up some good points where I would rather have a polished and finished product than having something rushed in a quicker timeline. I do agree with that. Bottom line is, Shamik Moore is still corny. I said it. I'm going to say it again. It's just ridiculous. It's outlandish how corny he is. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.